Dirk, thanks very much for joining us. A lot of focus, obviously, around ESG. What are you seeing in terms of the social element of
Yeah.
that?
Well, I think the social element is maybe the softest in it. That's the S in ESG, and that's also for soft and not only for social. But probably it's also one of the most important aspects in there. If we look at the taxonomy at the beginning, there's kind of the community thing. There's also the human resources and health and safety thing. The latter two are more related to the tenant, whereas the first one is probably more related to the building. So kind of talking about surrounding of asset, which means sort of flexibility and third-party usability, local acceptability, which also relates to integration and exchange with neighborhood, or openness to the public, stakeholder pressure, which sort of is also related to safety and smart building. Walkability, which is not only the mobility concept and public transport, but also accessibility. And obviously all these points interact with each other. And so to say, the taxonomy defines certain requirements and sort of gives us words on what to measure. And as we say, what gets measured gets improved. But from my impression, we still have to develop sort of a language, what these words really mean and what is the gist of all of it, the mindset behind the overarching framework. Then, because ultimately in ESG, we have a lot of form, but the substance is, as always, more important than the form. And if we look at kind of what the real estate market is experiencing, on the one hand side, rising prices all over time, rising rents, declining yields. We also see a lot of kind of political pressure, especially in the residential area, where landlords are perceived as just seeking their profit and being in kind of opposition to the tenants and a little bit also to the communities they're acting in. But obviously kind of a building is much more than just a cash generating unit. It's also much more than kind of a CO2 emitting machine or something like that, because kind of buildings form villages and cities, and ultimately buildings sort of form society. And it's not only that people make buildings, but also that buildings make people. Yeah, they are kind of the places where we are born and raised, and where we love and where we cry. So it's kind of more than just kind of the physical thing. It's also the, so to say, the mental thing, the social thing in buildings. And Richard Sennett called it flesh and stone, which is, I think, very nice wording. And Corona has shown us that we can sort of take nothing for granted, because we're sort of locked in the buildings. But the important thing of buildings is not only the inside, but the, so to say, the outside, and the interaction of buildings with each other, and the interaction of people with each other. But buildings, from my perspective, should sort of enable public space for all and everyone, and not just for consumers, and not just for the inside. And they should give room for interaction, to bring us outside our bubble. And just as we are locked in our bubble now more than ever before, we see that necessity also for the development of society. For me, the S in ESG should also stand for the X in a certain way, kind of the extra above and beyond function, and the integration that building may have, the integrative aspect of being sort of a glue for society.
Do you see this also becoming much more important in terms of ESG and beginning to play into valuations as well?
I think it has always been important, and it has always been kind of the ultimate goal of building a building and creating a city. We as valuers obviously look very much at values and thus also at money, but ultimately money isn't the goal. It's just kind of a sort of a measurement, and the ultimate goal should be to build a good building that now is more ESG compliant than before, that consumes less energy than before, that produces less CO2 than before. Not only good to the environment, but also good to the people, and enable people to lead a better life than without these buildings. I think with ESG, we have the chance that this kind of social focus, now talking less about E and G, but more about, again, the S, that this kind of comes into play, because as I said, we do have the words now also to measure these things, and hopefully we can develop a language that brings us forward in this area.
Thanks very much for joining us, Dirk.
Thanks, Richard.